All right, so today we are going to be working on this Excel project. We're working with formulas and functions. And so we're going to be doing possibly some stuff that you haven't done before. We'll be using um, some a little more complex formulas than we've done in the past. But hopefully if you have a question, again, just stop me and let me know. And I am more than happy to break in and answer that. So hopefully you've got this file open, this EX2-1. We're going to go ahead and save it right away as tour expense analysis. So I'm going to just file, save as, or you can click on that little icon, the little save icon up in the top corner. I'm just going to save this again to my desktop. And I'm going to save it as tour expense analysis. All right. So the first thing we're going to do with this, we could just kind of take a look at it and get familiarized with it. We've got this tour expenses by quarter for 2017. And again, this is that Reason to Go company that we've been working with for the rest of these projects. We've got some country names over here on the side. We've also got some quarters outlined. And then we've got some spaces over here to create some totals, and then also some rise, average, maximum, and minimum. So we kind of looked at this a little bit in that last lesson on Monday. We kind of created some of these formulas, excuse me, but we're going to look at it a little bit more today as well. All right, so we've got this one saved. So let's go ahead and we're going to select that range B4 through B11. So I'm just going to come up here, B4 through B11. And then for those of you that have it, if you're working with a PC, you have this little quick analysis tool. And again, we talked a little bit about it the other day. If you're working with a Mac, this is a tool that's not available on Mac. So you'll just have to use your Home tab and then editing group right over here with that auto sum. But if you're working with a Windows computer running Windows OS, you can click on that little quick analysis tool. And then again, we've got all of these little options available to us. Formatting, charts, tables, sparklines, and totals. We're just going to click on that total. And then we're going to click the sum on the bottom. And again, the bottom, to pop it on the horizontal is going to be blue. If we need to pop it on the vertical, we can see there's more options over here as well. The vertical is going to be that kind of goldenrod color, but we're going to choose that sum below option. And again, this is just a quick way to do that. If you don't have Windows, you can go ahead, select that same range, go to your auto sum options and do the same thing. You can click that button. The only difference between using that quick analysis tool and using the auto sum option in the editing group is that the quick analysis tool will kind of put the text, when it populates it, it's going to put it in bold. Hi, Emily, we just started. So if you've got this file open, great. And I will unmute you for just a second. How are you today? All right. Okay, I'll mute you again. All right. And again, so when you're using that quick analysis tool, it's going to populate in bold on the bottom or wherever it calculates your totals. When you do it the standard way, using that auto sum feature, it's going to populate it in just the standard text that we're using. All right. So now I'm going to click on cell B12, that one we've just populated that text into. And then again, if you use the quick analysis tool, this is going to be bold. If you didn't, it's going to be plain like this. We're just going to fill this right across. And we can fill it all the way over here if you want. That's totally fine. It's going to be a 0 right now. And then you'll notice that it also gives in the top left corner, if the system notices or the application notices that we've got an error in a formula, it's going to give us this little message right away. So right away you can see right here, it says there's an error in this formula. It refers to cells that are currently empty. And so if I look at it, I can see that it's calculating a sum from F4 through F11, which I don't have any information in yet. So it's right away, it's just telling me hey, wait a minute there, fella, you've got an error in this formula. I don't know what you want me to do with it. And so for right now, I'm going to ignore it. I'm really particular about having little marks on my when I'm working, and so when I've got a spelling error or there's a little error in a formula or something, and I don't know if it's OCD or something, but it drives me crazy. So this will disappear in a second when we populate this formula, but I'll normally just look at what the error message says, and then I'll go ahead and say, okay, I can either trace that error or I can say ignore it, or you can get help on it as well. All right, so Becky is joining us also. Good afternoon, Becky. We just started. We are doing that project 2-1, and we just did a save as tour expense analysis really quickly. And then so far we've just done this calculation right here. So we've just calculated the total row. And again, we just selected our range, either did auto sum, or if you're using a Windows PC, we did the totals on the bottom, and then we filled it right across. And we'll fill it all the way over, but. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and click in cell B14. And then in cell B14, we're gonna calculate a 20% rise in this total. So we wanna look at, if we increase our quarter one by 20%, what's that gonna look like? And again, there's two different ways that we can look at this. We can look at it as in terms of what the total is gonna be with a 20% rise included, or we can figure out what 20% is gonna be and then add it on later. So again, that's two different ways of doing it. And there's also two different ways to do this calculation. And so I'm gonna do it one way first, and then I'll do it another way. I'll undo it and then do it a different way. But so again, to calculate a 20% rise, we first need to figure out what 20% of our total is, and then add it back to our total. So we're gonna create a formula. So we're gonna start with our equal sign right away, and then we're gonna click in cell B12, and then multiply that. So times, using our asterisk key, you can either do 0.2 or 0.2. And that's gonna give us that 20%. Now, once we've got that, it's only gonna be, and you don't have to hit enter yet, I'll hit enter, but it's only gonna give us what 20% would be. And so in order for us to figure out what the 20% rise is, we're gonna have to go ahead and add, so I'm just gonna say plus, and then click in cell B12 again. And so again, it's taking B12, and then it's adding 20% of B12 to it. Then we can hit enter, and then you'll notice that we've got our total. Now, the other way that you can do this, which I actually prefer to do this, is if you understand how to determine a percentage, an increase, you could also do equals, and then select cell B12 and multiply it, so times, and then 1.2. Again, because we're taking 100% of B12 plus that additional 20%. So 1.2 is going to be the 100% plus the additional 20%. If I hit enter, you'll see I've got that same number. And so there's, the book will show us a couple different ways to do it. Whatever way you find most convenient, go ahead and do it that way. For me, it's a lot quicker to do a cell times 1.2 or 1.05 or 1.7, as opposed to doing equals B12 plus B12 times 0.2. But again, as long as you're coming up with the correct answers, there's not really a right or wrong way to do this. All right, so now I'm going to come down and go to cell C12. And, actually, I'm going to go to C14, sorry, go to C14, and then I'm going to do equals, and then again, You can do it either way. I'm gonna do it the times the 1.2, but if you wanna do it that other way, go ahead and do it the other way as well. We can do, again, C12 times 1.2, and then hit enter, or you can do equals, click in cell C12, and then times 0.2, and then add, so plus C12 again. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Whatever method you choose, it's going to give you the same answer. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and use this fill handle to drag it right across. And again, this is something that we kind of looked at the other day, but I will also take a look at understanding what absolute references and relative cell references are. We looked at that a little bit the other day, but we're gonna start building some of those absolute references here in just a bit. All right, so now we're gonna also insert a function. And so the functions are going to be, if you click on this little function button right up here, it's gonna give you this function dialog box, and it's gonna give you all these different options. And so I can come down here and kind of scroll through. These are the functions that I've recently used. So get pivot data, my advanced class I was working with this morning, they're doing pivot tables. And so we were getting pivot data from another table and kind of importing it into another worksheet. But so we've got get pivot data, decount, which is working with a database, and it's creating a count within a database. So there's VLOOKUPs, which are vertical lookups, HLOOKUPs are horizontal lookups. So there's all these different functions. But then, so you can right here, you can see where it says select a category, recently used. So these are my recently used functions. But you can see, if we look at this, there's all of these other options as well. We've got financial functions, time and date functions, math and trig functions, statistical, logical, text. And so there's all these different options right here. They're also, I'm gonna cancel this for a second. They're also gonna be right up here in our formulas. We've got our function libraries right up here as well. So we can click on this drop down, and it's gonna show us all of the functions that are available in our financial category, the functions that are available in logical. And so we're not going to get into that today, but there's other places where you can find this information that you may be looking for. Again, I'm going to go back to my home tab. And then in this category, this one right down here, so in cell B15, I'm going to go ahead, and then again, there's a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to go ahead and click equals to indicate that a formula is coming. And I'm just going to start to type average. Then you notice that when you do that, when you say equals and you start to type a word, the application automatically kind of assumes that you want to insert a function into this. And so it brings up common functions that have that start the same way that you're using. And so I can just come up and say, yep, average is what I want. I'm going to double click, 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 and then it automatically sets it up for me. So it populates average, and then I can select what I want to calculate my average. And so if I'm looking at the average for Q1, I want to total up the individual quarters by country and then divide it by that number. And so I'm just going to come up here, select that range, and then after it, I'm going to hit either my enter key, or you can put in the parentheses, either way, and then enter. And then that it will automatically do the function for you. So it's going to add these all up and multiply by that count. And so it's just a very convenient way to do it. Another way we can do it is, like we looked at the other day, we can come right over here into the cell C15, and we can click on our auto sum, choose our average function right over here, and then again, do it that same way. And again, like we talked about the other day, when you do one of these auto sum functions, Excel kind of predicts what it thinks you probably want to do, but it's not always the right thing that you do want to do. So we're just going to come up here and we're going to say, no, we don't want to average one cell. We want to average all of Q2 for all of our countries. And again, we don't want to include that total because it's going to skew our data. And then go ahead, you can either click the enter up here or click enter on your keyboard, and it will bring that number right in. And then again, you could use your ribbon if you wanted to as well. So once we've got that, we can go ahead and fill that over. And it's going to just fill the same formula relative. And again, so we're calculating this formula using Q1, which is in column B, and you can see it's averaging B4 through B11. When we shift over to column C and looking at Q2, again, you can see now it's averaging C4 through C11. When we shift over to D, D4 through D11. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about relative reference. It's going to run that calculation on a cell relative to the one that we're in. Now, when we create an absolute reference in just a little bit, it's going to calculate it much differently. All right, any questions so far? If any, jump in. If not, I'll just keep going. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to look at doing those maximum and minimums. And so when we do this, we looked at it one way the other day, but there's always going to be a couple of different ways, typically 3 different ways that a Microsoft is going to allow you to do a function, whether it's in Excel, PowerPoint, Word, Access, Publisher, OneNote, Outlook, you name it. I'm going to come down to cell B16. And then again, I'm going to say equals, and then start to type the word. We're going to create a maximum. So I'm going to type in M. And then again, you can see it recognizes right away that it's quite possible that we want to do a function. And here max is right at the top. I'm going to go ahead and double click on max, and it puts that right in for us. And again, so now it's giving you kind of a hint right at the bottom. So it wants the maximum with the number 1, number 2, blah, blah, blah. If we come up here to this function, this little FX button, we can click on that. And then now it's gonna give us a range that we can select here as well. And so when you're creating more complex functions, this is always handy because it really kind of gives you, it kind of walks you through what you're calculating. So all these different things are going to give you little hints. So if I'm in this number 1 cell, it says returns the largest value in a set of values, ignoring logical values in text. And so if I select my range, you can see I'm going to say okay, but right here it gives me it tells me what the answer is going to be. So if I'm doing everything correctly, it's going to return a value down here, and then it's going to say right over here in the bottom the formula result, and this is going to be in that what will populate into that cell. So I can go ahead and say okay, and then again 7295. If I look here, USA has 7295.06 in Q1. Nothing else is higher, so that is truly my maximum. If for some reason Australia changed to 8,000, now the new maximum is 8,000. And again, it's creating these functions or using the functions and formulas. It's automatically going to recalculate the data as your data changes, which is really nice. All right, and then let's do that minimum as well. So I'm going to come over here to that B17, and I'll do the same thing. I'm going to equals, and then MI, and then again, it brings up suggested formulas. We want to do that minimum. So I'm just going to click on minimum, and this time I'm just going to select the data right here, and then go ahead and hit enter, and then it automatically runs that calculation for us. And then again, the other common way to do that, we did it, I think most of you were here the other day on Monday, but if you weren't, the other way to do this is using this auto sum. There's a lot of quick features right in this auto sum up here. If we click in cell C16 and I come up to this auto sum, I can choose max. Again, it predicts a range that it thinks I might want. I'm going to tell it what range I really want. Again, I'm just left clicking in cell C4, holding it and dragging through C11 and then releasing it, and then go ahead and hit enter. And then you can create that minimum function the same way. right up to that auto sum. Oopsie, not auto sum. We want to do the min. Come on. Sorry. Min, and then select our range, and then enter. All right, so now we've got these formulas in here. I'm going to go ahead and select both of them together. You know, typically we've been dragging one over at a time, but as many formulas that we have created, we can pull all of them over at the same time. And so again, I just selected C16 and C17 together, click and hold, drag down, and then get my little fill handle in the bottom right, get that little crosshair, click over it, and just pull and release, and it'll automatically create those calculations for us. All right, so far so good. All right, again, let's go ahead and save it. And so now we're going to copy and move some cell entries. And so we've got this 20% rise figured out down here. We also want to run a new calculation. So we want to make another rise to this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select B3 through E3. So B3 through E3. And then I'm going to copy it. So I'm just going to click on my copy, or you can right click and choose copy right up here, or you can do Control C. Again, either way, there's always going to be 3 ways to do it. And so we're going to come down to cell B19, right below this minimum. And then again, if you're using a Mac, you don't have this function available to you, but I'm going to expand my clipboard. I'm going to use that little launcher to expand my clipboard. And so you can see right down here in my clipboard, I've got that text that I just copied. I can go ahead and just click on it, and it automatically puts it there, but it's the same thing as it's just the same thing as a paste. So if you have a Mac, you don't have this clipboard launcher available to you, you can just click on that paste button and it will paste it in for you. Again, so I apologize to the Mac users that there's a couple of these options are a little bit different when in Windows and Mac OS, and I'll try to kind of identify those in advance so nobody's getting confused, like, wait a minute, Shane, I don't have that option. All right, and so now I'm going to go ahead and come right over here. And again, with this clipboard, and again, I apologize to the Mac users, with the clipboard is going to be a way that we can store information. So when we're navigating between applications, so if I was integrating this data with like a Microsoft Word document that I was working on, or if I was integrating into PowerPoint, this clipboard is going to be great because the clipboard is going to be the same in every one of my applications. So if I were to open up Word right now, and I opened up a blank document and I looked at my clipboard, then you can see I've got this data right here. If I click paste, it's going to paste that information right here as well. If I opened up PowerPoint, PowerPoint's going to do the same thing. And so one of the drawbacks to using Mac version of Microsoft Office is that you don't have this option. So you'll have to keep navigating back and forth between the applications. But if I was working in several applications simultaneously, I could just copy all of the information that I wanted in one, and I could have a list of maybe 7, 8 things over here, navigate back to that other application, and then just navigate to wherever in that document that I wanted to paste it, and just click, 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 and it will automatically bring that information in. It is super, super slick. All right, and so with this clipboard, the clipboard has the capability to hold 24 items in it. Now, an item could be an emoji, an item could be a word, an item could be a letter, an item could be a 10,000 page novel. One item is one item. Like every time you click the copy button, you're creating a new item. Now, once you get past 24, the 25th item will knock the first item out of the queue. And so if you decide that this was the first item that you copied, and you wanted to be available because you're going to be copying a lot of stuff, you could just come over here to this little drop down and say paste. And that way it would paste onto your clipboard. So when you copy that 25th item, then the second item would queue out, and this first item would still stay at the top of your clipboard. And so it's just a way that you can kind of choose things that you may need later. The one thing is, when you close down the application, it will either automatically erase your clipboard, and so everything that's in your clipboard will disappear, because it will give you the option when you're closing down. It'll say, Word has placed a large amount of data on your clipboard. Would you like to save it? And if you want to save it, you can say, yes, I want to save it. But it's going to take you a while to shut down your application, because it's going to have to save all that information into a temp file. If you don't need it, then just go ahead and say, no, don't save it. And it will immediately close down, and it's not going to take up any storage. It won't take up any additional time to shut down that application. But then again, if you need that information, you can save it. But if you don't need it, then you can just come over here and say clear all, and it will clear it out for you. And then again, you can close that clipboard whenever you need to. There we go. All right. So now I'm going to come over to cell B20, and I am going to create a new formula. So actually, I'm going to come over to cell A20 first, and I'm going to type 30% rise. All right, and then in the quarter one, I'm going to go ahead and create that formula for a 30% rise. And again, you can do it, and I'll let you do it whatever way you want. Again, I'm not here to dictate how you want to do this. I'm here to show you the different ways that you can do it. And again, I prefer multiplying by the 1.3. If you want to do it, B12 times 0.3 plus B12, that's totally cool too. Again, I'm just going to do equals, click in cell B12, and then times 1.3, and then enter. And then there's our new calculation. So we've got a 30% rise over here as well.
Shane, I'm not getting that. So it's equals, and then you put in B12.
Equals, and then you can either, when you're doing this, you can either type the characters or you can select the cell. I always think selecting the cell is much easier, but if that's, if you can't do that, then you can type it as well. But it's, we're going to type again. I'll undo this so you can do it with me. Again, I'm selecting that cell B20, and I'm hitting my equal sign. And then I want to create the 30% rise based on my quarter one total. So I'm just going to come over here to cell B12 and click in cell B12. And I should get equals B12 in my formula bar. And then after that, I'm going to hit my asterisk key, so times, and then just type 1.3 and then enter.
Okay.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay, cool. Yep. And then again, and we can fill this across, but I can also do it the other ways as well. So if you want to go ahead and fill it across, go ahead and fill it across. I'm going to do it by entering the text as well. So again, I want to run my calculation based on quarter two totals, and I want to do that 30% rise. So I'm going to say equals, and then now I'm just going to type C12, so C12 times 1.3, enter. And whoa, what did I do? Oh, I did, okay, so that you can see, right here I can see this is a really strange number for this, because it's not 30% above this. This is, what, 815,000 some? And so now a teachable moment. So I can look back up into my formula and see what I did. And so instead of multiplying it by 1.3, I raised it to the 1.3 power. And so that little caret, the little up caret looking thing, that means an exponent. And so if I wanted to, if I wanted to square that number, I would do C12, the caret 2, which would mean C12 to the second power. And so you can see right here, I'm multiplying it to the 1.3 power. And so that I do not want. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that and retype that times 1.3. Enter. That is much better. That's a more manageable number. And then again, the other way of doing this would be equals, click in there, times 0.3, and then add, oh, that should be 0.3, and then plus, and then click back in that cell C12 or D12, and then enter, and that's going to give us the 30% rise above that. And then that way I can fill it across. Again, so there's just, I don't know, just showing you a couple different ways to do those actions. And some of them take longer than others. All right. So now we're going to take a look at absolute and relative cell references. And again, so if there's something, if it doesn't click with you, by all means, just say, Shane, I don't get that. And then I can try to like rephrase it in some way. But when we're using the relative references, again, it's kind of creating, it's using the relationship between the cells that we're working with. And again, so when I was in column B and I calculated based on column B values, when I come over to column C, if I'm copying that formula over, when I shift one column over, it recognizes, the formula recognizes that I want to shift one column over here as well. And the same thing, if I shift 2 columns over, it recognizes that I should be shifting 2 columns over to create those values. But that's not always how we want to do something. So, you know, sometimes we want things to be done a little bit differently. In that case, we can do a absolute reference, and an absolute reference is going to kind of, it may use a relative reference with an absolute reference. And so in this case, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say in cell H1, I'm going to say rise. And then in cell I1, I'm going to say 40%. All right, and then if I had kept that stuff on my clipboard, I can redo this again. But I'm just going to select B3 through E3 again, copy it, and then come down to B22 and paste it. So now I've got my new quarter labels over here. And then I'm going to come over here and type in cell A23. I'm just going to type new rise. And so now this time, we're going to create a calculation based on this value up here. And again, so we want this new rise to equate to this cell I1 up at the top of our worksheet. And so we're going to create it the same way that we've done before with a little twist. So I'm going to come down to cell B23, equal sign again to indicate that the formula is coming. I'm going to click in cell B12, and then I'm going to say times, I'm going to click in cell I1, and then I'm going to add, so then plus, and I'm going to click back in cell B12. Now, in this case, it's helpful to understand that formula because we're going to want to use this instead of 1.4 or using that 1 times whatever. So we're going to have, again, it's going to say B12 times I1 plus B12. And then if I hit enter, you can see it's bringing me up this 40%. So I've got that formula created. And so now I want to copy it across. And so if I go ahead and copy it across, I'm going to, again, B12 times I1 plus B12. I'm going to fill it right across. And then you're going to see like, okay, wait a minute, there's something wrong here because this number is 3,500 and this number is 3,500. This number is 44, this is 44. So something's not working correctly. So again, if we look at that formula, B12 times I1 plus B12, if we come over, we've got C12 times J1. And again, we came over one column. And so when we created this calculation, it came over one column. If we look at column D in cell D23, now it's multiplying by K1. Again, we shifted 2 columns to the right. It created that relative reference 2 columns to the right. And so this would be a case that we don't want to have this relative reference occurring. We want it to only multiply by that one cell. And so if we come over here, we can see this. It says formula refers to empty cells. So we know that there's an error here somewhere. And so this is a case where, and again, this question, somebody have a question? Oh, sorry. This is a case where hopefully it will work the same on a Mac, because I think there's a way that you can use your function keys in this formula. But with this, we're gonna indicate to this formula that we only want to look at this cell reference right here, this I1. So I'm going to come up to this original formula that I created, where it says equals B12 times I1. I'm just going to bring my insertion point into that formula bar somewhere up there. And then I'm going to hit my function 4 key. So I don't want to click on cell F4. I want to use my function 4 key, which is at the top of my keyboard. I'm going to click F4. And when I do that, it's going to populate that value with a $sign in front of the row and a $sign in front of the column. So you can see, and I'll click away from it for a second. So now you can see it says equals B12 times $I, $1 plus B12. And that $sign is just indicating that we want to create this formula, and we only want to look at this particular cell. We don't want to look at cells relative to it. We only want this one. So now I can go ahead and select enter. And again, you can see that it's the same number that I had before, but now when I fill it across, now all of these numbers change. And if I look at my formulas, C12 times I1, D12 times I1, and then E12 times I1. Again, so that's the beauty of, oh, Tracy, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to have you slow down with that formula.
Oh, no worries at all. And again, I can yep, I can undo it. And then again, so with that, again, we only want the formula to reference a specific cell. Again, because if it's going to be that relative reference, it's running this calculation based on a 0 value, so it's not going to affect anything. And again, so if you don't have access to those function keys like the F4, F2, F12 keys, you can type $I, $1. It works the same way. It's just more convenient if you can click that F4 key and it automatically populates that for you. But in this case, I clicked up here and hit my F4 key while I was touching either the I or the 1, and it will automatically recognize that I want to create that absolute reference to that specific cell value. And then when I'm done with that formula, I just hit enter or click on the little green check mark up here to enter the formula. And then again, it doesn't change the value in this cell because this is the original one. And then I just filled it right across to create those values. Yes, Brenda, do you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
So when I copied mine across, I didn't get that little error with those little triangles in the boxes. It just was,
when you created the relative reference?
No, before I did the relative reference, when I copied it across,
yep,
it didn't show like that was an error in the cells. Yeah.
Huh.
You know why that would be?
That I don't, what was it giving you for the values? Was it just
It
multiplying
was
this?
giving me like just the totals that are
Okay.
up in quarter 2, 3, and 4, you know?
Huh. Yeah, I don't know. There might be something in the kind of in the running in the background that, you know, if you, I mean, we don't have to look at it right now, but if you look in your in the options, there's a lot of different
Yeah,
ways you can have your formulas display, where
okay.
you can do your data stuff, where you can look at how you want the program to respond to error messages. So
Yeah,
it could be something in there too.
like it's turned off or
Yeah.
something, maybe? Yeah, okay.
So sorry.
No, that's okay. I just was curious.
Okay. All right. So we've got, did everybody get that? I don't want to keep going forward if people have a question on it. We're good? Okay, cool. And again, so the nice thing about that, and so again, when I was growing up, I played this like dice baseball game called Stratomatic Baseball with my brother. And we were total nerds. This is how we learned statistics when we were little. But we would play these dice baseball games. We would calculate all of our statistics, and then we would create our leaderboards. We did all this by hand until we got our like Commodore 64 computer. You know, we had our little word processing program, but then we also had like a little really basic spreadsheet program. And so we could kind of create these spreadsheets, but we couldn't use these absolute references. We didn't know how to use an absolute reference. So every time we did it, we would have to run new calculations all over and over and over and over again. It would drive us crazy, because we knew there had to be a simpler way to do it, but we just didn't know how. And so in this case, if for instance, we decided, you know what, we don't want to look at a 40% increase in revenue. We want to, or in expenses, we want to look at maybe a 35.5%. So we can just come up here to our cell, this I1, and we can type 35.5 and then enter. And then now you can see it recalculates all of these numbers based on this. Whereas before, if we wanted to do this 30% rise, if we wanted to change this to 35.5, we would have to change this to times 1.35. Then click this one, times 1.35. Then click this one, times 1.35. I mean, we would have to do that same thing over and over and over again. But this way, when we create that absolute reference, we only have to change it once, and it changes across the whole spreadsheet or wherever we've used that absolute reference, which I think is such a cool feature. I mean, people might think like, oh my gosh, you're a total nerd, but I just think that is such a great feature to have. And again, since I used 35.5%, I came up, you know, I selected that cell I1, and I just increased the decimal. So right above it where it says number, I just clicked on that increase decimal one time to increase the decimal, so I could see exactly what calculation I was running. All right, so is that kind of clear with that absolute references? And again, that's, you know, we've looked at copying relative cell references, which were that just when we copied the, you know, B4 through B11 over to C4 through C11, and then now we've looked at copying that absolute cell reference. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to create my totals over on the right side of my table now. So I've got Australia, Brazil, blah, 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 quarters 1 through 4. I'm going to, and again, if you're using a Mac, I apologize again. It's probably easiest to click on here and then do auto sum and then enter. But if you're using Windows OS, we're going to look at that quick analysis tool again. So I'm just going to select my range B4 through E11, and then I've got my quick analysis tool. I'm just going to select it, and this time I want to do my totals, but I want the sum vertically. So I'm just going to come over here, click on that sum vertically, and it automatically creates the sum there. And then you can see, since I had that formula here, it kind of gave us that error message at the very beginning because we had a 0 here. We created the formula, but we didn't have a value there. And so now once we've created those numbers, now it automatically populated that formula for us as well.
Okay, Shane, so what do I do with my Mac here? So I highlight it all, and then what do I do?
So with the Mac, it's probably easiest, since you don't have the quick analysis tool, it's probably easiest to do click in cell F4 and then just come up to that auto sum that in your home tab editing group and click auto sum and then enter and then just copy it down. Because it's going to do the same thing. It's just like a 1 or 2 extra steps.
What is auto sum under?
Auto sum, it kind of looks like a little sigma, like the Greek sigma.
Yeah,
so
I don't.
It's in the home tab, and then it should be in the editing group.
Okay, editing. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't have those little pictures like you do. So I'm like,
okay. Sorry.
And plus, like, I've got a split screen, so it's like even tinier. So I can't see half of what you're doing.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So that's why I'm asking like these stupid questions.
No, they're not stupid questions at all. And again, if you're running a Mac OS, this is going to be a little bit different. Again, because Windows makes it really convenient when you're running Windows, but when you're not running Windows OS, it's a little bit different because they kind of want you to purchase the Windows OS instead of using a Mac OS. But again, if there's something that you're not getting, by all means, just jump in and say, "Hey, Shane, stop. You're not bugging me at all. I don't think it's a stupid question. I think it's a good question." So, and Becky, did you have a question? It looks like you unmuted yourself.
Yeah. Can you just go back and before that question came up?
Go back to this, the auto sum.
Yeah. Can you just go back and did that?
Yeah. So I'll undo it.
Yes.
Yep. All right. And so again, running my Windows operating system, I can select the entire range. And then I've got my quick analysis tool down here in the bottom right. And so I can just click on that. And then it gives me my quick analysis options. Again, it's just going to analyze that data very quickly. I want to choose the totals tab because I want to create the totals on the vertical. And so right over here, I can see sum with the little yellow vertical line as opposed to the sum with the blue horizontal line. So I chose the sum with the vertical and selected that one, just clicked on it and it populated. Again, but the other way that you could do it is to just click in the cell and then click on auto sum, and it will create that, it will run that calculation for that row and then just fill it down. But either way works. Just using that quick analysis tool is a little bit quicker because it's only it's just a drag and one click as opposed to dragging, clicking, calculating, and then copying. Does that work for you?
Yes. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Cool. Okay. So we've got that. So we've got this spreadsheet, kind of flushed in pretty well. So now we're going to go ahead and did you have another question, Becky? Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Sorry. It just looked like you unmuted yourself again. All right. So now we're going to create a round function. And so we're going to round a number. Now there's a difference between rounding a number and removing decimals. And so if we look at, let's say one of these values over here in the totals, if we look at our total numbers, we've got these numbers with the decimals over here. If we don't want the decimals to display, we can come right over here into this number group and then just click on our decrease decimal. And if we do that 1, 2 times, it will eliminate our decimals. Now, another way to do that, I'm going to add them back. Another way to do that is to click on this number launcher. And then when it pops up our number, we can tell it how many decimal places we want. So if we wanted 5 decimal places, we could change it to 5. If we wanted 0, we could change this to 0. So, so however we want that number to display, there's always a couple different ways that we can do that. I'm going to keep that one as it is for just a moment. All right, but now I'm going to come to cell B14. And so with this 20% rise, I'm going to have this number display without decimals. And so I'm not going to use the decrease decimal function. I'm going to do what's called a round function. And so I'm going to select in cell B14, and then I'm going to come right up to my formula bar. Now that I've got cell B14 selected, I can come up to my formula bar. I'm just going to click right after that equal sign. And so right after the equal sign, I'm going to type RO to start to type round, and then you'll see the round function is available to us. I'm going to double click, click, and then it comes in, it equals round, and then it has our formula in here. Open parentheses, B12, either times 1.2 or 0.2 plus 1 B12, however you created it when you did it at that time. And so now I'm going to hit my, I'm going to hit my end key. So it's in the top, for me, it's in my top left of my keyboard. Or sorry, not in the top left, that's my escape key. It's right above my like number pad. Otherwise, if you don't have an end key, just click at the end of the line. So you can do it either way. It might be easier because some of you, if you're using a laptop computer, you may have to use your function key and then hit end because it's a key that functions in a couple different ways. And so it might be just easier to click at the end of that, at the end of your formula bar to do this. But so however you want to do that, either get over to the end with the end key or just click at the end of it is totally fine. And then once I'm at the end, I'm going to tell the program how many digits I want to round to. And so you can see again, when we have these functions, it automatically gives us a little hint. So it says round, and then the number, and then the number of comma, the number of digits we want to round to. So if we wanted to round to 4 digits, we would say comma 4 and end our quotation. We want to round to 0 digits. So we're going to say comma and then type 0 and then close our parentheses. And so now we're telling the program that we want to run this calculation, but once we have an answer, we want to round it to the 0 decimal place. And so now I can go ahead and say enter. And then it ran that, it rounded that number for us. And so I can go ahead and fill this across if that's what I want. All right, and then again, you'll notice that when it rounds it, and I'll undo this for just a second, when it rounds it, it's gonna look at, it'll be kind of like we did 0 decimals, but you'll notice that this cell C14 has a value of a decimal 0.7, so that's going to round up to 42,224. Cell D14 has a value of a 0.56, so that's going to round up to 22. And then cell E14 has a value of 0.37, so that one's going to round down. It's not going to round down, but it's going to stay at 45,624. And again, we can fill it up, we can copy that formula across, and then it just creates those calculations without the decimal places in it. Everybody get that one? And again, when we start using some of these functions, then some of the stuff can get a little tricky because it depends on how you're creating the functions and how you're putting the parentheses and the commas in and things like that. So again, if something isn't clicking, just let me know and we'll fix it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this again. And so now I've got my data populated into here. Now I want to go ahead and also do some formatting. Format my number values, and then I want to look at representing my data in a visual way to make it easier for the people that I'm displaying this to, for them to kind of decipher it. So again, I'm going to kind of do what we did the other day when we were working with the when we're working with those values, I'm going to come up right up here. So from B4 through F12. So I'm going to select that entire range. And then I'm going to select right up here in my number group. I'm just going to click on that $sign. So I'm going to apply the accounting style format. And again, the accounting style is going to have a fixed $sign on the left of the cell. The currency format is going to have a floating $sign that's going to align with the numbers at the right. And so now once I've done that, I've applied this accounting formatting, you can see like, whoa, what's going on here? But again, when we talked about that, if you ever get all these little pound signs or hashtags in sequence, all that indicates is that the number value in that cell is too wide to display in the cell with that cell width or with that column width. And so I'm just going to come up here between F and G, get that little two-way pointing arrow. So again, right up by my column headings between F and G to get that two-way pointing arrow, I'm just going to click, and it will automatically resize that column to the best fit. And so you can see that I've also got this, because my totals are a little bit wider. Here, I'm going to come in, I've got a lot of these to do. I could either do click over and over again, or this time I'm going to select, come up to the column heading, B. If I hover over B, I get that down pointing arrow. I'm just going to click, hold, drag across to E, and then release. So I've got all of these columns selected. And then in my Home tab cells group, right over here, I'm going to choose this format option. And this is going to allow me to format my cells. So I can look at cell protection, formatting the numbers. I can format my number this way too if I want. But right over here, you can see we can adjust our row height and our column width very easily. If we know, if we want a specific column width, we could click in the column width and type, 18 or something. Or in this case, I want the program to automatically fit my text. So I'm just going to come right up here and say auto fit column and just say click. And then it will automatically fit that column to the width, to the widest number in that cell. And so again, we've applied that accounting style formatting, but as we talked about the other day, it's not always wise to apply that, to have that $sign to all of these numbers. The top row and the total row are adequate, because we know that since we're indicating this with that top row and the total row that these are dollars, we don't have to keep saying $. So I'm just going to come, and this time I'm going to select B5 through F11. I'm not going to include my top row. I'm not going to include that bottom row, but all of the numbers in between I'm going to include. And this time, instead of hit it with that $sign, I can either use my launcher to take away the symbol. So I can come here and say no symbol, or I can just come up here and say comma formatting or comma style, and it will take away that $sign and apply that same number formatting. All right, and then I can do the same thing with these numbers. I can go ahead and now with my rise, average, and minimum, I'm just going to apply my currency style to this one. So again, and I'm not going to use this little $sign. This time I'm going to use currency formatting, which is going to be in this little drop down. So again, it's in my Home tab, number group. I'm going to click on it and say currency. And then so now you'll see when I click on currency, now these values that I've rounded are going to display as zeros. They're not going to have those 2 decimals anymore. I mean, they'll have 2 decimal places, but they're not displaying those decimals because we rounded it to a whole number. So if I came in here and deleted round, it would put back the value that it used to be, but I'm okay having those values rounded right now. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my row 20 and row 23. Only this time I'm going to use my non-adjacent selection. So if you remember, we used this the other day. I'm going to click in cell B20 with my left mouse, drag it across and release. So I've got B20 through E20 selected. Now I'm going to hold my control key down and select, click and hold in B23, drag across and release, and then release the control key. And so now I've got this row, just these values selected, and these values selected, and non-adjacently. Again, if I wanted to select them, I can't scroll through the whole thing, because when I apply different formatting, I'm going to affect other cells as well. So I just want to do those two ranges. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come up and apply that currency formatting. And then we've got those values, the formatting applied to those values as well. All right, so far so good? Okay, cool. All right, so now again, we're gonna look at, we wanna kind of display this information in a way that's like visually appealing, that's gonna help the people that we're working with analyze this data in a little different way. And so I wanna create a couple different charts. And so there's a couple different things we can do. We can look at a quarterly data piece. So we can look at just one quarter. We can look at the total. We can also look at all of these quarters with all of our countries kind of together as well. So there's a couple different ways that we can look at it. So first of all, I want to look at my total values. And so I can see that the total is 153,000. I want to look at to see how each country is represented by this data. So what I'm going to do, and again, we're going to have to use a non-adjacent selection for this, because we're going to select the countries. So I'm going to select, click and hold an A4, drag through A11, and then hold my control key down. And then I want to get those total values. And so it's important that we match the numbers of columns or the numbers of rows with the numbers of rows when we select this. Otherwise, our data is going to be a little skewed. And so then I'm going to, again, hold my control key down and then select F4 through F11. And then I can release control once I've got my range selected. And so now you can see I've got my column, or I've got my country headings, and then I've also got those total values. And so now I'm going to create I want to create a chart. Now, when we're looking at two data points, and again, our two data points are our country and the dollar value. When we're looking at two data points, a pie chart is a really convenient way to analyze that data. And so I'm going to come over and go ahead and look at my insert tab. And then in my charts group right over here, and for me, it's in the middle. You can see I've got some recommended charts. If I click on that recommended, it's going to give me some recommendations that may or may not be what I'm looking for. I can also look at all charts. So here's recommended, and here's all charts. And so in all charts, it's showing me all the charts that are available, whether it's a column chart, a line chart, a pie chart, a bar chart, an area chart, a XY scatter chart. We've got maps. We've got a tree map. These ones are really cool. Sunburst. I mean, so there's a histogram. There's lots of different charts, waterfall. There's lots of different ways that we can represent this data. Now, for a lot of people aren't going to understand a surface chart. A lot of people aren't going to understand what the radar chart is doing. And so when we're dealing generally, column charts, bar charts, and pie charts are going to be the safest bet. And so in this case, I've just got my two data points. Pie charts work beautifully for this. So I'm going to create a pie chart. Now, again, I said this, I think this the other day to one of the groups that was working with me. When I'm applying like formatting and when I'm creating objects, I prefer to use gradient fills, and I prefer 3D objects. So for me, I'm going to choose this 3D pie. If you want to use the 2D pie, go ahead and use the 2D pie. If you want to use the donut, use the donut. Again, it's just understanding how you can create these, and then once you understand it, you can go ahead and play with it however you want. But for me, I'm going to use the 3D pie chart. I'm just going to click on it. It's going to give me a preview of what that's going to look like. Then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. All right, and so here's my 3D pie chart, pops right in. All right, so far so good. Cool. All right, So now we've got this chart in here, and there's a couple different things that we can do with this. We can modify this in myriad ways. So right up here at the top, so for me, this is in my, and this is only available if your chart is selected. If my chart's not selected, you can see I can't do anything to the chart, right? There's nothing up here for me to do. But if I click the chart, now you can see I've got a chart tools design tab and a format tab as well. And so these are only available when I have my object selected. And again, so here you can see I've got my, and you might not have all of these, because I use it I use Excel in a different way than most people probably do. But so the developer tab, the help tab, the Acrobat tab, and the Power Pivot tab, those are my last four. Before these, if I click away from my chart, then you can see I've got developer, help, Acrobat, Power Pivot. Those chart design and format tabs are no longer up there. But if I click on that object, those tools are once again available to me. And these are called contextual tabs, because they're only available in a specific context. So if we were working on a picture, we would have a picture tools tab. If we were working on a shape that we created, we would have a drawing tab. If we were working in a smart art object, we would have a smart art tab. I mean, so there's all of these tabs and they're only available if we have that object selected. So if we've got a smart art in our document, but we don't have it selected, that smart art tab won't be visible to us. Again, so my chart is selected. I've got my chart design tab and my chart format tab. And again, yours may say chart tools design or chart tools format, and it could be displayed a little bit differently depending on which version of the software you're running. But regardless if it's an Apple or if it's a Mac OS or a Windows OS, you still should have these tools available to you. And again, so I'm going to click on that chart design first, because I want to play around with my chart. And so you can see with this, we have all these different styles, and these are just pre-made styles that we can apply. And so we can hover over these. And again, when you hover over them, you're going to get a live preview of what it's going to look like if you applied it. And so we can see this one's kind of got this almost like a transparent pie. This one's it's got a shadow around it, and it's kind of a gradient gray background that's kind of cool. Ooh, this one's kind of fun, like it's kind of a washed out look to it, very vibrant. And so if you hover over those, you can get a different feel for what they look like. And again, when I'm working with this, I kind of like the beveled look, the beveled rounded look to it. And so I really like this chart style 8. And I don't know what it is about it. It kind of looks like the chart's covered in fondant or something. It's, this kind of circular rounded edge to it. Just to me, it looks really cool. It's got really vibrant colors. I like that one. So I'm going to go ahead and choose chart 8. But if you click on that more option, you can see we've got a couple other options as well. And then you'll notice that with the different chart style, with chart style 1, it's really basic. We just have a legend at the bottom. With chart style 2, we don't have a legend. We just have data labels popped right into the middle of the pie pieces. This one, we have data labels with values, with percentages, and then a legend at the right. I mean, so each different chart style will represent our information a little differently. So I like this one. I'm going to choose this. Now, once I've got this selected, I can format it how I want to. So I can say, all right, I want to give, I want to apply a chart title here. So I could say tour expenses FY 2017, or if I don't want to have a chart title, I can just come over here, click on this little button, and just deselect the chart title, and it's gonna expand the view of that chart, to kind of fill up that space a little bit more. And again, however you want to do it is however you apply it however you want to. There's no right or wrong application here. And then also we've got these data labels. And so right now mine, and this is called outside end. Right now mine are kind of outside the pie at the end of each piece. And so since I've got data labels, I don't need a legend. because the legend is just going to be a redundancy. It's got the colors with the country, but I've got the colors with the country right here as well. So if you've got a data label with the series value on it, you don't have to include a legend. But if you don't have the series value, then you may want to have a legend on there. But so for me, when I'm working with data like this, I also like to know what percentage these different things represent. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my data label. So I've got my data label checked, and there's a little right pointing arrow over here as well. I'm going to go ahead and click on that little right pointing arrow. And then when I do that, you can see I've got some options. So I can put my data labels center. I can put them on the inside, outside end. I can put them best fit. And now when I do best fit, it appears that it is putting them in white text on the background. So I don't know why it's doing it like that. But then like a data call out is going to give it, kind of give it a little dimension to it. And I really like the data call out because the default with that data call out is giving us the series name as well as the series percentage. But we can modify that as well. So I'm just going to click where it says more options. Oh, come on. There we go. Oh, shoot. All right, one more time. Click on this data labels, more options. And it's going to give me these options over here. So I'm going to look at my label options. So it's going to be right over here, this label options. It looks like a kind of a column chart. And then here you can see what it wants the label to contain. And so you can choose a bunch of different things. I mean, you could make this really busy. You could say, I want the value from the cells. And it's going to give you this, it's going to populate that cell value. I want that series name. I also want the value and the percentage. And so you get all this muckety muck stuff on here. And so if you're using a legend, you don't have to show the category name. But if you're not using a legend, then it's kind of wise to choose that category name. And again, I would either say you'd choose the category name and a value, or the category name and the percentage. And so in this case, I'm going to say I want the category name and I want to include the percentage on it. And again, it's giving me these the little boxes over here. If I wanted them to use those little call outs, I could put those call outs on there as well. And then if I made it a little bit bigger, so I've got my little call out boxes. If I made this a little bit bigger, now you can see the call out boxes. I can kind of bring them out a little bit, readjust how they're going to display. And that little call out is going to be attached to that piece of pie. And then in addition, if I wanted to kind of focus on one piece of pie, like if I really wanted to focus on my India market, there's a couple different ways I can do that. I can click on this pie, and when I click on it, you'll see that I've got these little blue handles that will pop up around each different piece of pie. But if I click one more time on India, then all of those little handles disappear except India. And so now whatever I do, it will apply only to this India pie piece. And so then you'll also notice right over here in my series option, this is just going to be for this one series, I also have a couple different ways I can display it. And so we have our angle, excuse me, our angle of slice, which just means where this piece of pie is in relation to everything else, and my explosion. And when you think about explosion, like blowing something up, and that's kind of exactly what it is with a pie chart. I can explode this piece of pie. So if I want to focus on India, I can say, you know what, I want to do a 15% explosion on that India, just the India series. I can either type 15 or I can click up to 15. But again, what that does is it just pulls that piece out a little bit. So it can kind of be the focus. But you can also just grab it and pull it, and it will do the same thing. You can grab it and pull it out. You can grab it and push it back in. Oop, wrong piece. But focusing on India only, I can just pull that piece out. And then if I wanted India to be more front and center, I can take this little angle of first slice and just kind of bring it around so India is at the forefront. And then again, if it makes these labels all wonky, well, if it makes the labels all wonky, I can go ahead and fix them a little bit. So here's my British label. I'm going to bring that more in line. All right. And so again, so now I've got India right at the forefront of all of my information. And so if I wanted to write a little note, I can make a little note. But so now I've exploded that India piece out in front of everything else. All right, so that's one way that I can represent that data. I'm going to go ahead and close my format labels. Another way I can represent the data is if I want to look at, compare countries and their quarterly expenses. I'm going to select everything but my totals over here. And again, so I want my labels to show up on my chart. So I have to select my labels, the columns and the headings. So I'm going to have to start in cell A3 because I want to include all of this stuff in row 3 and this stuff in column A. So I'm just going to click in A3, hold my left mouse button, drag through row or column E and through row 11. So I've got A3 through E11 selected. I'm going to go ahead and release. And this time I'm going to create, and I prefer column charts, but a couple different ways to represent these larger data sets is with a column or a bar chart. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my insert tab. I'm going to come over to my charts group again. And then again, this time, if you look at recommended, it's going to give you recommended. And you'll notice that it's not recommending a pie chart in here. And the reason it's not recommending a pie chart is because we've got 5 different sets of data points in here. And that's way too much for a pie chart. I mean, if we did a pie chart, it's not going to represent the data in a way that's usable to us. So I'm going to go ahead and select and again, I like 3D and I like column charts, but there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do that 3D clustered column. You can do a 3D stacked column. And again, this is good when you're looking at the total values and then it's representing each quarter as a part of that total column, which is kind of cool. And then the 100% stacked column is looking at each column is 100%, and then looking at what portion. So you can see Malaysia has a very large quarter 3, but relative to the United States or France, we can see that Malaysia's quarter 3 is worth what? Oh, that's because I think that's a wrong value. 8430, I must have made a mistake there. But that would be because it's so much larger than all of the other ones in that column that's why it's giving us that data point that's so much bigger. But again, I prefer to use my 3D clustered column. You can use whatever one you want. And so now I've got it in here. It's kind of mucking everything up because I've got my data over here. I've got a pie chart right here. And I want to kind of focus this column chart somewhere else. So I'm going to come up, when I do this, it brings up my chart tool design tab. And then right over here at the end, I've got this move chart. So I'm just going to say, I want to change this chart from here, move it to its own sheet. So I'm just going to click on move chart and then say, where do I want to put it? I want to put it in a new sheet. And I want to call that sheet tour expenses by quarter. All right, so tour expenses by quarter, I'm going to say okay. And then when I do that, you can see now I've got this new chart sheet, tour expenses by quarter. And then here's the original sheet that I started with. So now I've got this chart all by itself on its own sheet. And so now I can format it how I want to format it. And again, since I've got this little fondant-y looking thing over here, I might want to apply that fondant-y looking thing over here. So I can go to my chart design and then find that one. I think it's going to be like 10 or something. Yeah, style 10 looks pretty close. All right, and then again, if I want to put the values in here, I can add the values. But when I do that, it's gonna kind of put all of these numbers on there, and I can show you what it will look like. If I click on data labels, you can see now I've got all these numbers and it kind of mucks everything up. So it's probably not the wisest choice to do that. But one of the ways that we could do this, if we wanted to make sure that these values were represented with the data, is we have, when we do a column chart and a bar chart, we also have an option to add a data table. So if I click on that data table, then you'll notice that right below the chart, it gives me the option to include those data values. And so that way I don't have to make everything all mucked up at the in the chart plot area. It can all be kind of submerged below that chart. And so if I wanted to know exactly what those values were, I can just look down here and say, okay, Q1 in Germany is 5182. Q2 is 3094. All right, and then again, if you wanted to include that chart title, you could change it, just click in it and change the name. If you don't want a chart title, because we've already got this thing called tour expenses by quarter, you can just say, nope, I don't need a chart title. I'm going to deselect it so I can give a better view of what those columns will look like. All right, and so then again, if I decide, you know what, I would, instead of looking at all of this information, you know, country by country, I kind of want to see how each country stacks up against one another by quarter. I can come right up here into this chart design tab, and I've got this option that says switch rows and columns. And so right now you can see I've got Australia, Brazil, Britain, and then within each series, I've got quarters 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I switch my rows and columns, now I'm looking at information by quarter with all of my countries within that. Again, so here I'm looking at my information. I've got my countries separated with the quarters in each label. This other way, I'm looking at my quarters and then comparing the countries within each quarter. And so there's always going to be a couple different ways you can look at that data that you're representing with that chart. All right, so I like it this way. I'm gonna go ahead and save that. All right, now, hopefully nobody is so lost that you gave up, on me. How you doing so far? Silence. Well, I can see you're all still here. That's a good sign.
Mine doesn't look anything like yours, so that's all.
What is your? But what does it look like?
Because some of I screwed up some of the numbers and whatever. So, but at least I get the general idea.
Okay. Okay. And again, if you make a mistake somewhere, right now you're not gonna damage anything. But if you make a mistake, by all means, just stop me and say, hey, Shane, stop just for a second. Again, you're not, somebody else might have made the same mistake you did and is just afraid to ask it, or, somebody might make a similar mistake later on down the road. And, so it's, again, I'm totally cool with you stopping me and asking me, because I've always got a little bit of time built in at the end that I'll, fill it with some different things that I think you should know. So like in this unit, we didn't necessarily talk about charts and graphs, but this was a really good opportunity to talk about them because we had the perfect data. We had the perfect data sets to kind of discuss how to visually express that data. So, all right. I'm glad, Becky, that it's much better than Monday. All right, so no other questions? All right, so we've just got a couple minutes left. So then if you don't have any questions, I can let you get out of here just about 4 minutes early or so. And then for those of you that are coming back for, what's it called, access, then I will see you in just a few minutes. If you're not, then I will see you either tomorrow for Word or on next week for Excel again. Question, Tracy, or you just?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'll see you in Access. I don't even have Access, so I'm just gonna watch you.
Okay, that's totally fine. Cool. All right, so I will stop the recording of this, and then I will close this little room, and then if you